Okay, I want to share some of my favorite shortcuts. I'm going to walk through three different types. We've got function or F key shortcuts. We're going to talk about control shortcuts and alt shortcuts, otherwise known as alt key tips. So starting with function shortcuts, there are two that I use more than any others. The first is F4, which I've talked about. One way that it's useful is by allowing you to add or modify cell reference types. So like I showed you in one of the earlier lectures, you can place your cursor directly into the cell reference and use F4 to cycle through fixed, relative, and mixed reference types. You can also use F4 to repeat your last command or action. This is really useful for things like inserting or deleting rows or columns, changing cell formats or styles, etc. One thing that F4 does not do is it won't repeat entered values or formulas. So I'll show you some examples of that. And then the other F shortcut is the F2, which basically dives into a formula. It displays the cell ranges that are tied to a given formula, and it allows you to edit those ranges or edit the formula itself. Really useful to help diagnose formula errors or make quick adjustments to cell references and arrays on the fly. So I showed you a sneak preview of how the F2 key works when we built that multiplication table, but let's jump into Excel and take a look at one more example. So I've got a formula in column C, very basic data array here. Again, if I click into any reference, F4 will cycle through each of the different reference types. I can also use it to repeat an action such as inserting a row. So now I'll select row 4 and just hit F4. Select 6, hit F4. As you can see, that's working nicely, and I can actually just undo that if I decide I don't want to make those changes. Now the F2 key, if I select any formula cell, hit F2, it's going to allow me to dive in and edit the formula. And as you can see, it highlights the cells that are referenced. So one little trick is if I want to change the reference, so let's say I want it to be B2 divided by A3 instead of A2. Instead of going in and typing A3, what I can do is actually just grab this reference and drag it down, and it will change it for me. So that's a nice little trick with the F2 function. Moving on to the control functions, there are three that I use all the time. There's control arrow, which jumps to the left, right, top, or bottom edge of a contiguous data array. So basically the last cell that contains data. Control shift arrow does the same thing, except it selects the data as you move. So most common application of the control shift arrow shortcut is when you want to select an entire array of data and you don't want to have to scroll all the way down. Sometimes you have an array that's 100 or 200,000 rows long, so you can just start in A1, hold control and shift, arrow right, arrow down, and you've got your entire array of data. Last tip here is control page up and page down, which lets you jump between tabs of a workbook. Note that there's a full comprehensive list of control functions at the link below. These are just the three that I tend to use most often. So jumping back into our Excel workbook, let's use the control arrow shortcut first. I'm going to start on A1, hold control, arrow to the right, arrow down. So as you can see, it's just jumping to the last cell containing data. Now I'm going to do the same thing but hold shift as well. And now you can see that it makes the selection as it moves. And again, the control page down and page up just moves between tabs. So if I hold control and hit page down, jumps to sheet 2, sheet 3, and then page up moves back to the left, back to sheet 1. Finally, we've got our alt function, which enables key tips. This basically just allows you to access any function in the ribbon using keyboard shortcuts. You don't need to hold down the alt, you can just press alt and you'll see the key tips activate. So these little numbers and letters in gray boxes, those are the key tips. So you press alt to reveal the tab level shortcuts, and then you press whichever one you want to dig deeper into, and it will reveal another set of key tabs. and you continue to drill down until you get to the specific function that you want to jump to. So sometimes it's a combination of multiple key tips to get to the function that you need. Two that I use way more often than any others are Alt-HVV and Alt-HVF. Alt-HVV pastes special as values. Alt-HVF pastes special as formulas. So I'll show you another quick example. Right now our values in column C, these are all formulas. I can select all those, hit Ctrl-C to copy them, and then with D1 selected, instead of going into paste special values, I'm just going to hit Alt. You see the key tips appear. H, I've dug into the Home tab. V, I'm into the paste sub options, and then one more V, paste special as values. So whereas column C contains the formula, column D contains just the value that was the output of that formula. Similar case with Alt-HVF. I can copy the formula in cell C1, and if I want to paste this formula down, if these cells didn't contain the formula, let's just delete them to show this. I can copy C1 and then select C2 through C7, hit Alt-HVF, and it will paste the formulas into that range. So again, those are just a few examples, but they're the shortcuts that I tend to use more than any others.